It's Cristo here on TalkTv. Thanks so much for your company. And apparently we've tagged the wrong you in the Twitter feed. Sorry about that. Yes. Oh, now Tom's having a very off day today. He screwed up the sound, and now it's some poor person who is. I mean, like, I'm sorry, but Connor Tomlinson is not an Oriental-looking woman who eats pastries. You know, he may be many things, but he's not that.
You're denying my trans identity.
Yeah, actually, probably. Maybe that's how you do it. Well, you know Rachel Dolezal? Dolezal, that's it, who identifies as... Well, did you see the one this week? Oh, my word. I've got to find it, because I sent it to my partner, and then we'll go back to the awful stuff at the Manchester Arena. But I sent it to my partner. He made me send it to him. The Norwegian man, right?
I have not heard of this one.
Right. A man in Norway... I don't know whether this is a spoof. A man in Norway is sparking outrage on social media after he was sympathetically interviewed about an identity he has on Norwegian television.
Right.
This is Jorand Almey.
Bless you.
Who is an able-bodied male who now identifies as a disabled
female.
woman.
I have heard this, yeah.
Almey stated that he had always wished he had been born a woman who was paralysed from the waist down, so therefore now uses a wheelchair the whole time, even though they're fully able-bodied.
Logically speaking, what do gender ideologues have against this? Because if you can cut off one appendage and be someone else, what's stopping you from disabling the use of the others?
Yeah, but see...
I don't agree with any of it. But when you start those dominoes falling, it doesn't make sense.
I disagree with you. I don't think you can say you don't... How can you not agree with it? What do you mean when you say you don't agree with it?
You can't change your biological sex by thought, and I don't think it helps. So we're actually interviewing Richie Herron down the line later, the gentleman who spoke to Times Radio a little while ago about his detransitioning surgery, and he said, actually, I had severe OCD and childhood trauma that was misdiagnosed as gender dysphoria, and they conducted the operation on him. They drilled a hole in his pelvis. They left him for 5 days to bleed out. The reason they did that is because they gave him the wrong dose of what's the drug they give you to put you out?
The anaesthetic.
Anaesthetic, yeah. Because women and men take different doses of anaesthetic. Because he'd identified as female, they gave him the female dose. So he was hemorrhaging blood without a blood transfusion. He is now incontinent. He says, I don't say the word trans regret, I say the word trans grief, because it's the person I now cannot go back to.
But that's medical malpractice.
That is very, very common. They have the highest rate of complications, the highest rate of resurgeries. It is barbaric. It doesn't help trans people. It doesn't.
Hang on. I've no problem with a person as an adult who wants to have that surgery knowing the risks and live as a different sex to the one that they were born as. I understand that biologically there are going to be things that will never change. I completely get that, and I completely understand and respect that there is a legitimate conversation to be had about the clashing of rights and women feeling like their rights have been eroded by that, which I think is a very toxic conversation, and I think that conversation needs to be had with respect to both sides. But if you're asking me, do I have a problem with someone deciding that they want to have reassignment surgery, knowing the risks and doing so as an adult, that's nothing to do with the state. That is nothing to do with anyone else.
I don't think they're capable of consenting to it if they are in a position of severe distress, and I think a lot of the time the medical institutions overlook it a lot of the time because it's very profitable. I mean, you saw lots of places in America especially come out and say the reason we started trans-identifying surgery is because after Obamacare we could sell it to these individual gender practices and say you will get a lifetime treatment patient for all the hormones, the repeated surgeries, for the repeated consultations. But that again is an argument for people having had the correct psychological analysis to do that, because the same number of people that you will say are going into this surgery because of psychological problems, they would also argue that if they didn't have the surgery because they are so unhappy with their identity, and again, I don't say this
thinking that women shouldn't be listened to. I don't say this thinking that there isn't a conversation to be had about when is appropriate for a child. Absolutely think that there is a value. But if you are an adult, you've had a psychological assessment, because what you're describing is very against, actually, the ideological framework of the freedom of the person to...
Absolutely not. No.
Yes, it is.
No.
What's it got to do with the state?
Because I'm not necessarily saying the state. I'm saying that, well, partially, because I don't think that... I think it violates the Hippocratic Oath, and so I don't think that's fair. Well, let's put it this way. In the same way, I don't think that doctors should be allowed to prescribe anorexics diet pills. I don't think people with gender dysphoria, which, when you say they have to have proper psychological profiling, they remove gender dysphoria and gender identity disorder from the DSM-5.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
This is
because there's a line between what is considered to be conversion therapy and what is considered to be proper and fair psychological analysis.
But they now say that conversion therapy is not affirming the gender identity of the person when they want to switch it. So they've played an Orwellian language game when a lot of the time, for example, and this is what the LGBT Alliance object to, a lot of young gay kids are pushed down the line, occasionally by homophobic parents or because they're just confused about their sexuality, and said, oh, if you're a boy that likes boys, it must be because you're really a girl.
Again, that is a fair conversation to be had, but there are also, and it should be acknowledged, thousands, maybe even millions of people that have had gender reassignment surgery who now live really happy lives as a result of doing that. You cannot possibly say that there aren't people that have done that, and we should also remember that too.
It's about a 50-50 split, because the suicidality and the mental health reporting rates are still about half even after post-surgery, and that's self-reported among people that say, I've had the surgeries and I am affirmed by my friends and family.
What would be your solution then? So if someone has gender dysphoria,
yes,
and again, respecting what you've said, which I happen to agree with, that you can be gender non-conforming as a child, you can be sort of, blur the gender lines without it needing to be medicalised.
You can be a flamboyant man. Welcome to the 80s.
Yes, exactly. I've got most of my work off the back of that. But what would be the solution in your mind if people weren't able to do that and they had that genuine gender dysphoria and genuinely wanted to no longer be present as the sex that they were born?
Do not lie to them and say that you can change your sex by thought, because that's not true, because you're setting up an impossible goal for someone to pursue. Like, even if you do all the surgeries, even if you present every day in your life, you're still going to look in the mirror and know in your heart of hearts that you haven't made the leap to the position you want to be. And that's where...
Who cares if they're happy by having done it?
But lots of people aren't.
But I'm talking about the ones that are. I respect what you're saying about the ones that aren't, but what about the ones, the thousands, the millions that are?
Because the problem is, if it's half and half that aren't, then do you really want to inflict this irreversible surgery on someone? The solution
is to give more preparation, which I agree with you on, to those that potentially would be unhappy. But you can't... I don't agree with saying to everyone, well, you just can't have it.
Knowing what that surgery is, I think, is too barbaric. Frankly, I will say that. And also, it is untrue to say you can change your sex by thought. If you are in a position where you're a man, for example, and you feel more feminine and believe that you would be happier transitioning to the woman, why do we give you hormones that are against your biology, which can cause you osteoporosis, cancer? Why do we not give you testosterone replacement therapy instead, which we give to 50-year-old men, to see instead, first, perhaps testosterone deficiency might be behind it. You might feel more comfortable in your own body, and that will do less harm than if we put you in estrogen.
Well, firstly, who's to say that hasn't been...
It doesn't happen. It actually doesn't happen.
But secondly, maybe they don't want that because they don't want to be anything other than becoming a different... And I agree, by the way, the biology within you, your skeleton, there are certain things that will never change. I also agree there is a fair debate to be had about women's sports. There's a fair debate to be had about the language, where you have sort of women's sexual health or women's gynecological clinics where they're getting rid of the word woman, and women have fought for that all their lives. And I absolutely believe that. However... I will stick to it. If you are an adult, you have wanted to do this, you have considered it in a fair and rational way, and you have had the help that you require to get there, I have no problem with someone going through that surgery.
I don't think it's possible to consider it in a fair and rational way if it's founded on an irrational premise, which is essentially I have the soul of a woman trapped in a man's body. That's not a rational premise. That is an emotional premise. I have a lot of sympathy for people that struggle with that, because you're also never going to get there, and that's really actually tragic.
But who cares if they're happy living as close to it as they are? Who cares?
Lots of people aren't. And I think you can see that lots of people aren't, not only in the suicide rates, but the fact that a lot of these protesters, a lot of these activist movements are driven by animosity, not just towards women, but towards people who tell them, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sympathetic to your plight, but you can't change your sex. And the outrage and the violence that's directed towards people like that, I do think there's a lot of bottled up internal aggression.
I think it's about intent when you say that. I mean, if you are to say that, look, biologically, deep down, when it comes to your skeleton, when it comes to certain parts of your chromosomes, when it comes to all of those sorts of things, when it comes to your height, when it comes to your lung capacity, when it comes to all of that, you're right. You those ingrained sex traits do not change. What you are doing is you are changing your outward appearance to match as close as possible the gender identity that you have. And I don't believe people sort of wake up one morning and decide it. I believe that there are people who have a genuine gender dysphoria, a genuine issue with their gender identity, to the point where the only thing that would make them happy, many of them having lived in the sex they were assigned at birth for years and been desperately unhappy.
Sorry, sex assigned at birth, even you're using the language there. It is their sex. It's not that just they arbitrarily assigned it. It's factual.
Yes, I know, but for the purposes of this conversation...
But they can't change the sex. You can only change the gender.
Yeah, you're changing your outward appearance to match the gender identity that you have.
So you can't change from the sex assigned at birth. It'll always be your sex. It's not just assigned. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
the fundamental premise.
But for the purposes of this conversation, I get frustrated with people who drill down on the language in these conversations, because it's language that's needed in order to know who I'm talking about. Yep. Like, for instance, I would describe you as a man.
Yeah.
Loosely. Now, I would describe you as a man.
You wound me, sir.
But in this conversation, if we were talking about gender reassignment, I would call you a cis man, not because...
That's redundant.
No, but it's just
highly redundant.
Just to clarify, or I would say, someone born as a man at birth who wants to change their identity is just an easier way of saying. If I was talking about you day to day, I would never describe you as a cis man. I'd never describe myself as a cis man. But in a conversation where you're talking about gender and sex assignment surgery, it's just easier to use that language.
So we're not going to agree on the surgery thing, but drilling back to the original premise, if you can change your gender and you can approximate it as close as possible to the point of where you will say, I will call you a woman, what's the difference between that and bleaching your skin or having a surgical procedure which paralyses you from the waist down? Are you not genuinely the other race or disabled?
Well, yes, but I don't think that there is... I mean, it's a fair point, but I don't think that there is a history of... disability dysphoria. I mean, this is one example that we've come up with, which is ridiculous.
There is actually in the DSM-5 in the same thing that the gender identity disorder is. It's like the reverse of phantom limb syndrome. People actually do it.
Well, yeah, I know. And there's someone I've read a book once from Dr. Raj Prasad. I don't know if you know him about someone who was convinced that their hand was out to get them and wanted to chop it off. That was completely ridiculous.
What is the difference between that and thinking my male
you can say your penis, it's fine. We're talking about it in an adult conversation.
A bit more early for this. What is the difference between saying that and my male parts are not a part of me, it feels alien to me, I'm a woman? There isn't. But I think basically you're struggling with it because you want to be sympathetic to that group.
And I don't care. I mean, I genuinely don't care. I mean, that's the problem. I care if it's being done in an abusive way that is not responsible. That I care about. And I care when it's done to vulnerable people in society who are under the age of 18. And there's a conversation to be had there. And I care about women who are worried about their rights being eroded. There's where I care. But if you are someone that is over 18 and it is a rational decision that you have gone through and you want to do it and it makes you happy, I don't care.
See, I think...
Would you refer to someone who had done it as their preferred...
No.
So if I had a sex change and I was sat here...
I'll use your name.
You use my name, but would you say him?
Well, in your personhood, why would I use your pronouns in front of you? Because also we use them to refer to someone when they're not around.
I don't know. You might say, Tom might come in, my producer, and might say, I'll get you a glass of water, and you might say, well, she wanted one, or he wanted one.
Oh, right,
there are occasions where you might do that.
No.
So you call me he.
It's not true.
I know it's not true, and I get
But
that.
that is where, and I don't think lying to people helps them.
Well, yeah, but it's also just not kind. I mean, I might want you.
I don't think lying to people is kind.
I might not want you to refer to me as fat, but
I might want you to refer to me as handsome and smart, but you're not going to do it.
well, I might do. But I wouldn't call you. Wouldn't call you ugly to your face.
See, if I thought you looked bad, I would tell you, oh, I wouldn't wear that jacket, mate, because I think that would be an improvement on your life out into the future. You might be blunt in the present. You might tell someone what they don't want to hear, but it might help them out into the future.
Anyway, we've gone down a road that
It's important,
it's an interesting conversation, and in fairness, these are the sorts of conversations that need to be had in a rational way, because there is too much toxicity in these arguments.
These are not had when they're screaming across the picket lines.
Yeah, and actually, in fairness, from both sides, I'm sorry to say, both sides are toxic in this conversation.
I hesitate to say so, especially considering I don't like the term TERF because I don't like the term feminist, but they've gone over and had this tour of Portland saying let women speak, and it's been shut down by trans activists saying we're going to throw bricks and pies at you. So I think that's slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are also... Anyway, look, we're getting...
Yeah, of course,
I'm sorry, I do believe that there are people on both sides that don't have great intent. And if we don't have a conversation in the middle, it's never going to get solved. And it's got to get solved. Anyway, let's do some of the tweets and stuff on this.